Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I've always prided myself on being a dedicated husband and a caring father, but lately, something had shifted, something that gnawed at my very soul. Every morning, as I laced up my boots before heading out on duty, a quiet ache accompanied me, a reminder of the cold distance growing between Samantha and me. At school events and community gatherings, she would casually dismiss my efforts, belittling my opinions with a smug smile that cut deeper than any physical blow. I remember one sunny afternoon at our annual neighborhood barbecue. I was trying to share a simple story about a recent rescue operation at the station when Samantha interrupted, laughing loudly. "Luke, you're so predictable, always playing the hero, but never truly living." Her words, meant to be a joke, sent ripples of humiliation through our circle of friends. I stood there, frozen, as their laughter filled the air while a part of me crumbled silently inside. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake off that burning sensation of inadequacy. At home, even the little moments were tinted by her biting comments. While I helped our children with homework, Samantha would remark, "You're too busy with your so-called noble job to be a real father," as if my nightly recitals of bedtime stories weren't enough. Each comment was a small crack in the foundation of my self-worth, and I found myself wondering if I was failing in ways I never thought possible. I'd lie awake at night, replaying her words in my mind, trying to make sense of the unyielding cruelty that now defined our life. Is this what I deserve? I'd ask myself in a quiet, desperate tone, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. At a recent family gathering meant to celebrate our children's achievements, the sting of her words became unbearable. While everyone congratulated me for my hard work and dedication, Samantha's casual jibe in front of relatives, "I suppose even a firefighter can burn out, huh, Luke?" echoed in my ears. The room fell silent for a moment before awkward laughter resumed, but the damage was done. I could feel my heart pounding with a mix of anger and sorrow as I questioned whether it was time to speak up or continue swallowing the bitter pill of humiliation. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should I confront her, risking even further damage, or keep enduring this quiet, relentless assault on my dignity? In that pivotal moment, as I watched my children exchange confused glances and relatives struggled to mask their discomfort, I realized that this was not just about pride. It was about the essence of who I was. I began to see that her calculated cruelty wasn't just a series of isolated comments, but a systematic erosion of my very identity. And deep within me, a seed of defiance began to sprout, even as I questioned if I had the strength to reclaim the respect I once commanded. That evening, I found myself surrounded by the familiar faces of close friends at a small, warmly lit diner. A place we had frequented for years, where the clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation once brought comfort, but tonight the atmosphere was thick with tension. As I sat at the long booth, trying to savor a moment of normalcy, Samantha's presence loomed large in a way that made my heart sink further. She breezed into the room with a confidence that masked the cruelty underneath, and almost immediately, the conversations began to revolve around me, though not in any flattering light. Between bites of her dessert, she let out a sarcastic laugh and remarked, "Luke, you always look so serious, like you're afraid you might actually catch on fire one day, not just on the job." The words stung like icing needles. I could feel every eye in the diner flicking between us as her friends giggled, and my stomach churned with humiliation. I tried to laugh it off, swallowing my rising anger as I forced a weak smile, but the damage was done. As the night wore on, Samantha's barbs continued relentlessly. At one point, when I mentioned a small promotion I received for an extra shift, she interrupted with a mocking tone, "A promotion? I guess even a firefighter like you can reach for a little more smoke now and then." Her remark was followed by snickers that echoed in my ears long after the conversation had moved on. I sat there, feeling the crushing weight of my own inadequacy, questioning every sacrifice I had made for our family. The inner voice that had been silenced for too long began to rise, its anger bubbling up into a storm of self-doubt and regret. I kept replaying the moment in my mind. Each laugh, each dismissive glance, as if they were shards of broken glass that cut through my self-esteem. By the time dessert arrived, my frustration had reached a boiling point. I could no longer hide behind a veneer of calm acceptance. In a burst of raw emotion, I stood up abruptly, startling everyone into a heavy silence. "Enough, Samantha!" I shouted, my voice cracking with the force of years of bottled-up pain. The sudden outburst silenced the room, and every pair of eyes fixed on me. A mixture of shock and sympathy painted on their faces. I have spent countless years putting your needs above my own, sacrificing my pride and my self-worth, all while you turn every attempt at kindness into a joke. I continued, my words tumbling out with a mix of anger and sorrow. I am not some insignificant bystander in my own life. I deserve respect, and I deserve better than to be the punchline of your endless jokes. For a long, agonizing moment, time stood still. The clamor of the diner was replaced by an almost deafening silence that reverberated in my ears. In that charged space, as the eyes of my friends bore into me and Samantha's expression shifted from smug amusement to startled indignation, I realized that the sacrifices I had made, the endless compromises, had been twisted into fuel for her amusement. I took a shaky breath and sank back into my seat, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away and leaving behind a bittersweet clarity. I knew then that this confrontation was not just a reaction to one cruel evening. It was the breaking point of a lifetime spent being diminished. As I sat there in the silence that followed, the weight of my own words settling in, I understood that something had to change. The person I had been forced to become under Samantha's ridicule no longer reflected the man I truly was. In the weeks following the painful outbursts and public humiliations, a nagging sense of unease began to settle in my heart, a quiet alarm that something far more sinister lurked beneath Samantha's polished facade. Each day, while I dutifully headed out on fire calls and brave rescues, my mind couldn't help but wander back to the way she acted during school hours. Her unexplained absences, her furtive glances at the clock, and the way she seemed to vanish for long stretches during lunch breaks. One rainy afternoon, driven by a mix of dread and determination, I returned home earlier than usual from a shift and decided to search for answers. As I walked through her silent house, I tried to ignore the steady hum of the rain outside, but every creak of the floorboards amplified the growing suspicion within me. I found myself in our shared study, a room where family memories hung in faded frames and shelves cradled trinkets from better times. Amidst the clutter of paperwork and old photographs, something unusual caught my eye. A small, intricately carved wooden box tucked away behind a stack of unopened mail. My heart pounded as I reached out and gently lifted the lid. Inside lay an expensive wristwatch and a collection of sleek, luxurious accessories that I instantly knew were not mine. The delicate engraving on the back of the watch, the unmistakable quality of the material, it all screamed that these gifts were meant for someone else, someone Samantha was secretly treasuring. I could almost hear my inner voice screaming in disbelief, "This is not for you, Luke." Shock quickly gave way to a bitter blend of anger and betrayal as the realization hit me like a freight train. Samantha had been hiding a part of her life from me, a life that involved someone other than the husband who had shared her dreams for so many years. I stared at the items as if they were a silent testament to her duplicity, my mind racing back to the odd phone calls and hurried messages I had overheard, and even that peculiar day when she brushed off my questions about a long lunch break with a vague excuse. My thoughts spiraled into a dark tunnel of emotions. Hurt, betrayal, and a growing resolve that I would no longer be the silent victim in our crumbling marriage. "How long have you been living a lie?" I muttered to myself, my voice barely more than a whisper in the quiet room. In that moment, I made a decision. I would gather every piece of evidence, every shred of proof, so that when the time came, I could confront her with undeniable truth. I carefully closed the box and tucked it away in a drawer, the physical act cementing my determination. The discovery had shattered any remnants of the man I once believed I was, replacing them with a steely resolve to reclaim my dignity. As the rain pattered softly against the window, I sank into the old armchair and stared blankly at the darkening sky, wrestling with the torrent of thoughts. I knew that this revelation was only the beginning, that there was a hidden web of deceit stretching far beyond a single gift. Each memory of her subtle dismissals, every sneer and snide remark, now made sense. They were all threads in a tapestry of betrayal. I resolved that I would not act impulsively. Instead, I would document every detail, preserve every message, and secure any evidence that could later expose the truth of her indiscretions. The hurt in my chest was now fused with a quiet, burning determination. I deserved to know the full story, I told myself, the words resonating with a newfound clarity. As I prepared to leave the study, a lingering thought echoed in my mind. The path to redemption might be paved with painful discoveries, but it was also the first step toward a future where I no longer had to endure the sting of betrayal in silence. With that resolve, I stepped out of the room, ready to embrace the hard journey ahead, knowing that every piece of evidence I collected would bring me one step closer to the truth, and ultimately, to the justice I so desperately craved. In the wake of that painful discovery, a transformation began to stir within me. A slow, deliberate metamorphosis from the silent victim I had once been into a man determined to reclaim his dignity. No longer would I let Samantha's betrayals define my worth. I set my mind to devising a plan that would expose every hidden lie, every secret rendezvous that had shattered my trust. That very night, as I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, I pulled out the ornate box I had found weeks earlier, a box that now symbolized her duplicity. The expensive wristwatch and the luxurious accessories inside were not mine. They were tokens of her clandestine affair. In a moment of quiet resolve, I decided to replace them with fakes, items that would mimic the originals perfectly enough to delay suspicion while I built my case. I spent days researching online, reading reviews, and comparing details until I was confident that the replicas I ordered would pass as genuine. Every detail mattered, from the delicate engraving on the back of the watch to the precise weight of each piece of jewelry. As I made the switch one silent midnight, my hands trembled not with fear, but with the anticipation of turning the tables. This is only the beginning, I whispered to myself, knowing that each step I took would bring me closer to exposing the truth. But it wasn't enough to merely replace her secret tokens. I needed indisputable evidence of her betrayal. I began meticulously tracking her movements. With the help of a trusted colleague from a station, I covertly installed a small GPS tracker on her car, a device so inconspicuous that she would never suspect it was there. Every evening, I would sit in my study, watching the tracker's logs populate on my computer screen, mapping out her every detour and unexplained stop. The red dots on the digital map painted a clear picture of secret meetings at motels and unaccounted-for locations near the school. Each new entry filled me with a cold sense of vindication. I kept a detailed log, recording every time, every place, and every pattern. It was as if the universe was confirming what I had long feared. In the quiet moments between monitoring sessions, I'd rehearse the confrontation in my mind, imagining the look on Samantha's face when she realized that her web of lies had been dismantled piece by piece. Late one night, as I reviewed the latest data, my heart pounded with a mix of satisfaction and determination. Every mile, every minute spent in deceit is a step toward justice, I murmured, the rhythmic beep of the tracker echoing in the silent room. I even began covertly capturing snippets of her conversations through a discreet recording app on my phone, making sure that I had every shred of evidence to support my case. The painstaking process was both exhausting and cathartic, as each piece of evidence chipped away at the false narrative Samantha had built over the years. The thought that she could so casually betray our family, while I labored every day to protect our home, ignited a fierce resolve within me. I knew that when the time came, I wouldn't just confront her. I would unmask her in front of everyone who had once turned a blind eye to her misdeeds. One evening, After a long day of cross-referencing tracker logs and reviewing recorded conversations, I sat back and allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. This isn't about petty revenge, I reminded myself. It's about reclaiming my life, my honor, and exposing the truth so that no one else is deceived. I could feel the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a steady, unwavering conviction. Every piece of evidence, every carefully executed plan was a step toward a future where I would no longer be diminished by her lies. In that silent, resolute moment, I vowed that nothing, not even the bitter sting of betrayal, could keep me from taking control of my destiny. With the replicas in place and a meticulously documented trail of her transgressions, I prepared myself for the next phase of my plan, a phase that would force Samantha to confront the consequences of her choices in the most public way imaginable. The day had finally arrived, the day they would mourn what they believed was my tragic end. I had orchestrated every detail with painstaking precision, enlisting the help of my station to fake a fatal fire accident. As I watched the city prepare for my memorial from a discreet vantage point, my heart pounded with a blend of sorrow, anticipation, and a cold determination that had been building for months. I knew that at my own funeral, Samantha would be there, smugly basking in her newfound freedom, accompanied by the very man who had betrayed our vows, the student's father. The plan was simple yet audacious: to confront her in front of our family, colleagues, and the entire community, exposing her deceit once and for all. The church was packed that day, the atmosphere heavy with grief and whispered condolences. I could hear the murmurs of disbelief as people recounted memories of a dedicated firefighter whose life had been cut short. Amid the somber hymns and the scent of fresh flowers, I watched from the back as Samantha sat in the front pew. Dressed in black and adorned with the customary veil of sorrow, she clutched a bouquet of lilies as if they were a talisman to ward off her guilt. Beside her, the student's father, a man who had once hidden behind promises of a secret tryst, sat with an uneasy air, clearly unprepared for the role he now played. My pulse raced as I silently rehearsed every word I would say. When the service reached its crescendo, I slipped away from the gathering. With the help of a trusted colleague, I managed to change out of my fallen uniform and into plain clothes. Stepping out of the church's rear entrance, I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, every step toward the main hall charged with purpose. I strode back in, each footfall resonating like a drumbeat of retribution. Gasps filled the air as heads turned and eyes widened in shock. I moved directly to the front, where Samantha's eyes locked onto mine in a mix of disbelief and mounting dread. For a moment, the church fell silent except for the sound of my measured breathing. "Hello, Samantha," I said calmly, my voice steady and carrying across the hushed congregation. "I'm afraid the truth has a way of returning, no matter how hard you try to bury it." The words were heavy with the weight of betrayal and long-held pain. She tried to speak, her voice trembling as she stammered, "Luke, this isn't possible." But before she could finish, I reached into my jacket and produced a sealed envelope. Slapping it onto her lap with deliberate force, I declared, "These are your divorce papers. It's time you face the consequences of your choices." Shock and outrage flashed across her face as the student's father recoiled in silent horror, and even the assembled mourners struggled to process the scene unfolding before them. In that moment, every cruel remark, every humiliating slight, every stolen lunch break was laid bare for all to see. I turned and walked out of the church, leaving behind a silence that roared with the promise of a new beginning. The power of truth, I realized, was not in inflicting pain, but in reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me for far too long. After the shocking scene at the church, I drove home in a daze, a mix of relief, residual anger, and an unfamiliar sense of freedom flooding through me. The cool evening air did little to calm the tempest inside, as every mile away from that hall of mourning felt like shedding a heavy shroud. I arrived at our house, the very walls echoing memories of a past that I was finally ready to leave behind, and stepped inside with cautious determination. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the hallway, reminding me that time was moving forward even if my heart had been frozen in that unforgettable moment. I sank into the worn-out sofa in the living room, trying to let the adrenaline subside and the magnitude of what I had just done settle in. The revelation had not been easy, and while a part of me felt vindicated, another part was haunted by the years of humiliation and deceit. Before I could collect my scattered thoughts, the front door slammed open, and Samantha stormed in. Her eyes blazed with fury and desperation as she took in the sight of me, and it was as if all the pent-up venom of our past erupted in that instant. "Samantha, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low and steady despite the chaos in my mind. "You think this is over? You think you could just walk away after what you did?" She spat, her tone a frantic mixture of anger and panic as she circled me like a caged animal desperate to regain control. I remained calm, the strength of my conviction steadying me like a rock amid the storm. "This isn't about walking away, Samantha," I said slowly, choosing each word with care. "It's about finally stepping into a future where I'm not defined by your lies." Her face contorted with disbelief. "Lies? I did nothing wrong. You staged a fire. You faked your death. How dare you ruin everything?" She shouted, her voice trembling with both rage and a hint of desperation as she tried to turn the tables. "I did what was necessary to expose the truth," I replied, my tone cool and measured, each word cutting through her cacophony of accusations. "You betrayed our vows. You deceived our family. And you thought you could play the role of a grieving widow while carrying on your secret affair." I could see her trying to justify herself, her eyes darting nervously as she searched for an escape. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" She sneered, stepping closer, her voice rising with indignation. "All those years, you played the martyr, acting like you were the only one suffering. But you're just bitter because I found happiness away from you." I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of every false promise and every public humiliation. "This isn't about bitterness, Samantha," I said firmly. "It's about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I have spent too many years letting you gaslight me, letting you twist every situation to make me feel less than I am. I deserve better." Her eyes flashed with anger as she lunged forward, desperate to grab onto something. Anything that could make her appear in control. "You're leaving? After everything we've built? You're abandoning our children," she cried, her voice cracking with the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady pulse of my new resolve. "No, Samantha, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm leaving a house full of lies. I'm walking away from a marriage that has long since lost its meaning. The only person I'm hurting now is myself, and I can't do that anymore." With each word, I felt the heavy chains of the past shatter a little more. In that moment, as her protests grew feeble and the raw truth of my decision hung in the air, I stepped toward the door. "This is goodbye," I said quietly, a final declaration that resonated with the strength I had finally reclaimed. "I'm done being manipulated, done being made to feel insignificant. I'm taking the first step toward a life where honesty and respect are not just empty promises." I paused, looking back at Samantha, whose face was now a mix of regret and fury, the consequences of her choices finally catching up with her. Without another word, I walked out, leaving behind a house that had once been our sanctuary but had become a prison of deceit. Outside, the cool night embraced me, and each step I took felt like a reclaiming of the man I was meant to be, a man unburdened by the weight of a broken past and ready to embrace the promise of a new beginning. The day after I left that house of lies, I sat in a modest conference room at a reputable law firm, determined to turn my heartbreak into a weapon for justice. My hands still trembled from the emotional storm of that night, but I knew that to reclaim my dignity, I needed to dismantle Samantha's carefully constructed narrative once and for all. Across the table, my attorney, a man with steady eyes and a calm demeanor, listened intently as I recounted every detail. The furtive glances during her lunch breaks, the secret trips to motels, and even the evidence I had gathered with painstaking precision. "Luke," he said, "this is compelling. With the GPS logs, the recordings, and the replica switch evidence, we have a strong case that leaves no room for her twisted version of events." I nodded slowly, feeling both a surge of relief and the weight of the future on my shoulders. Meanwhile, Samantha, ever the master of manipulation, had already begun to paint herself as the wrong party. She had contacted mutual friends and even a few of our colleagues, insisting that I was the one orchestrating a staged tragedy to win sympathy. Her voice, laden with feigned sorrow, was now echoing in the corridors of our community, twisting our shared past into a narrative where I was the villain. In a key meeting with the attorneys representing both sides, the atmosphere grew charged with tension as Samantha sat across from me, her eyes darting nervously as she attempted to project vulnerability. One of the opposing counsel, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for cutting through deceit, leaned forward and demanded, "Can you explain these detailed logs that contradict your version of events, Mr. Luke?" My attorney responded calmly, "These records, along with the documented evidence of her secret absences and our surveillance data, confirm that her actions were not only deceitful, but also premeditated. The facts speak for themselves." The courtroom-like setting of our meeting room fell silent for a moment as Samantha's facade began to crack under the pressure of irrefutable evidence. Her voice wavered as she attempted to shift blame, murmuring, "I never intended to hurt anyone. This is all a misunderstanding." I could see the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation that had driven her to live a double life at the expense of our family's trust. My attorney's steady gaze met mine, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. "The truth will not be hidden any longer," I said quietly but firmly, as if the words themselves were the key to unlocking the justice I so desperately sought. That meeting marked a turning point. As I left the conference room that day, I carried with me a mixture of cautious optimism and the hard-earned confidence that I was no longer the silent victim of Samantha's manipulation. The legal battle was only beginning, and I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I also recognized that every piece of evidence, every recorded moment of betrayal, was a step toward reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me. I took one last look back at the building, a silent promise echoing in my mind. I would see this through to the end. Justice, I believed, would not only vindicate me, but would also restore the truth for everyone who had suffered under Samantha's web of deceit. The days following the legal battle felt like stepping into an entirely new world, one where every breath reminded me that I was finally free from the chains of deception. I moved into a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a space that, though small, was entirely mine. Each morning, as I sipped my coffee on the worn-out balcony while watching the sun rise, I felt a tentative peace slowly seeping into my soul. I began to reconnect with the parts of me that had been buried beneath years of humiliation and heartache. My work at the station took on a renewed meaning. Every call, every rescue, now symbolized my ability to rise above the past. I found solace in the camaraderie of my fellow firefighters, who noticed the change in my demeanor, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. One day, while heading into the station, I overheard a coworker say, "Luke, you've really come a long way. You're like a new man these days." Those words resonated deeply, affirming that my decision to leave was the right one. Rebuilding my life meant more than just a change of address. It meant mending my spirit. I made it a point to spend more time with my children, attending their school events, and even joining them on weekend trips to the park. Their laughter, so unburdened by the darkness of our former life, began to fill the empty spaces in my heart. One afternoon, as we were playing catch in the yard, my daughter looked up and said, "Dad, you seem really happy now. I love spending time with you." Her words were simple yet powerful, igniting a warmth that I hadn't felt in years. At the same time, I began to explore my interests beyond firefighting. I joined a local community group where I could talk about my experiences and listen to others who had overcome their own battles. In one meeting, an older gentleman shared his journey of rediscovery after loss, and his story struck a chord with me. Sometimes you had to let go of what was to embrace what could be, he said, his voice gentle but resolute. I carried those words with me, understanding that each day was a new opportunity to build a future defined by hope rather than regret. Life wasn't without its challenges, though. There were moments when memories of Samantha's betrayal crept in, fleeting images of the past that threatened to unmoor my newfound stability. I would sit quietly at night, grappling with a mix of sorrow and relief. Yet, with every passing day, I learned to let those memories fade into the background, replaced by the vibrant reality of a life reclaimed. I started a small journal, jotting down reflections and the progress I made, no matter how minor it seemed. Each entry became a testament to my resilience and a reminder that I was more than the sum of my past mistakes and betrayals. I also reconnected with old friends who had been there before the storm, a network of people who believed in me even when I doubted myself. Over late-night dinners and long phone calls, I rediscovered what it meant to be supported and valued. "Luke, you've always been the rock," one friend told me warmly during a casual get-together. "It's inspiring to see you rise above everything." Those words, simple as they were, fortified my resolve. Slowly, I began to see that leaving Samantha was not a defeat, but a victory, a liberation from a life built on lies and empty promises. With every sunrise and every small triumph, I felt the burden of my past lifting, replaced by a quiet, persistent optimism. I knew that my journey was far from over, but as I looked out over my new world, a life defined by honesty, connection, and hope, I realized that I was finally beginning to live for myself. I had embraced a future where every step forward was a celebration of who I was becoming, a man reborn, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with unwavering strength and a heart unburdened by the weight of betrayal. In the months that followed my dramatic revelation, I watched as the scales of justice slowly tipped in my favor. Samantha's carefully curated world began to crumble with every passing day, a stark contrast to the steady rebuilding of my own life. I would hear whispers among colleagues and neighbors about her increasingly erratic behavior at work, reports of missed deadlines, heated arguments with superiors, and a once-respected reputation now tarnished by scandal. Her lover, the man who had been her secret accomplice, eventually abandoned her, leaving her isolated in a situation she had so carelessly engineered. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing some emails at the station, a co-worker confided, "Luke, I heard Samantha's been forced to take on extra shifts. Her school is in chaos, and even her administration is questioning her judgment." Those words, though not delivered with malice, confirmed what I had come to expect. The support she once enjoyed was slipping away, replaced by a stark reality where her actions had consequences. Meanwhile, I found myself flourishing in ways I had only dreamed of during those dark months. My renewed focus at work brought me accolades and promotions that reminded me of my true worth. I began investing in my future, securing financial stability, and making plans that filled me with hope rather than regret. One evening, after a long day, I sat on the back steps of my modest apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues. The soft glow of dusk made me reflect on my journey, and I whispered to the cooling breeze, "I no longer need revenge. My life is proof that truth and integrity prevail." In a quiet moment at a neighborhood gathering, an old friend approached me with a gentle smile. "Luke, you've really turned it around," he said warmly. "Your strength has not only saved you, but has shown everyone what it means to rise above betrayal." I simply nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude and acceptance. The pain of the past had given way to a newfound peace, a life built on hard-won wisdom rather than lingering bitterness. Even Samantha, who once had the world at her feet, now faced the harsh realities of single parenthood and professional setbacks. I would catch snippets of news on the local radio about her struggles, and while I felt a twinge of regret for the life she had lost, I knew it was the natural consequence of her choices. Her former allies had distanced themselves, and the community that once celebrated her now regarded her with a mix of pity and disapproval. In one particularly memorable exchange at a mutual acquaintance's birthday party, a guest remarked, "I never thought Samantha's star would fall this hard. It's like watching a cautionary tale unfold." The remark was not meant to gloat, but to acknowledge that sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, had its own way of balancing the scales. I realized that justice was not a matter of orchestrating elaborate schemes, but of letting life take its course. As I continued to rebuild, my focus shifted from the bitterness of revenge to the simple joy of being true to myself. I celebrated small victories, a promotion, a long overdue reunion with old friends, a quiet evening with my children that reaffirmed our bond. One crisp evening, while sharing a laugh over dinner with my kids, I found myself smiling at the thought that my future was now filled with promise and possibility. I no longer measure my worth by the failures of others, but by the progress I had made in reclaiming my life. In the mirror, I saw a man who had been scarred by betrayal, but who had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace each new day with a hopeful heart. The sting of Samantha's deception had faded into a distant memory, replaced by the undeniable truth that I had finally found peace. And as I looked toward the horizon, I knew that while her life had unraveled in the wake of her choices, my journey was just beginning, a journey marked not by the pursuit of vengeance, but by the quiet power of resilience and redemption. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.